أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Welcome to another episode of the Dictations. This is going to be an interesting one. At least for me, it was interesting. I don't know how interesting it will be for all of you, but this is just a continuation of the different types of discussions that we can do on the sort of recent contemporary history of the the Islamic civilization, and it concerns the relationship of Muslims and Muslim countries and regions with the West and their reactions to modernity and all of that stuff that we have kind of alluded to in some of the previous dictation series. This is one of those, and this one has always sort of interested me, but I never really got a chance to research into it. And then when I began researching for this specific episode, I realized that there is no research done on this, in the sense that I could not find any independent work published on this specific topic. I messaged some historians in Iran, and I asked them as well, and they didn't seem to know anything either. So they said, just look into the books that talk about the history of the Hausa, and maybe you might be able to find something in there. And I mean, that's where I found a lot of the information, and other information I found from sort of the what is called oral history. Because the oral history is like this idea of interviewing people who kind of lived and experienced a certain era, and asking them their opinions and their sort of experiences, what they went through, and so on and so forth. Or you can look into certain travel logs or memoirs of scholars writing about a certain era and whatnot. So anyways, it took me a couple of months to look into this, just to kind of prepare this one single dictations. The reason why it took many months is because I obviously work as well full-time, and I have other commitments. Otherwise it shouldn't have taken me this long. But anyways, now that we are here, we're gonna talk about an interesting topic. But before we begin, obviously, I want to start with this. Oops, sorry, not this one. This right here. One of the ththings that I started to look into in the last, I would say, maybe 3 to 4 years. This is 3 to 4 years before I left Qom. So I guess it was maybe 2017-ish, around that time. I became very interested in this whole intellectual history and the reactions of Muslims to the West and whatnot. And in that process, I kind of got interested in reading travel logs. And in fact, I created an entire folder on my computer. It is actually called leisure books, books I would read for during my leisure time. And it was not really leisure time. I would actually be reading these books because they were very fascinating, and they kind of gave you this perspective into the world of people, and at a certain period of time or a certain experience that they had. And actually it helped me a lot in terms of my understanding of the past, and what people what their ideas were and what their perceptions were and whatnot. Anyways, so travel logs are part of that genre, and they're extremely important. I'll give you some examples. Like one of the cool books, if you're interested, anyone who knows Arabic. Actually, this book has been partially translated into English as well, but it's not the best translation. It's called Al-Nishwar al-Muhadara. Just to kind of give you an example what I mean by leisure books. Al-Nishwar al-Muhadara is being translated, I think, in the early 1900s, with the title called Table Talks of a Mesopotamian Judge. Right now, this is just a book from, I think, 4th century, 5th century, Buyid Empire, so the time of, like, I don't know, Sheikh Mufid and Sheikh Tusi, like that era. And it's just a scribe who used to work in the courts of the Buyid Empire, Buyid dynasty. And he is just recording the daily interactions that are happening in the court, right? So it sounds kind of boring, but when you start reading through it, you kind of get this window into their world. And you kind of see, wow, like what was happening day to day in the court, and the type of stories he narrates, and the type of court cases that come to him or that come to the court. Very interesting. Some are like murder cases, and some are just like comedy cases. So anyways, like these type of works are important to kind of read. Anyways, the reason why I'm saying is that I came across this book that was recently published, right? And this is actually a travel log now. So some of these books that fall under this genre of like what I call leisure books, meaning I would read these in my during my time in Qom when I would have some free time, was this book called Zindagi Fardi Nashanakhte. Zindagi Fardi Nashanakhte. The life of an unidentified person. That is the actual title of the book that is published. And basically this book is, basically a travel log of a scholar named, look, it says unidentified person, but we know who the person is. His name was Shaykh Muhammad Hujjati Borujerdi. Okay, Shaykh Muhammad Hujjati Borujerdi. And this is a travel log of a student of the Hawza who writes about his life and his experience of how he sort of moved to Qom and what was happening in the early 1930s, and how his life was before that and after that, and how his life was in the Hawza. And it's very, very interesting, right? And this is at a very difficult time for scholars, because Reza Shah had just become the Shah of Iran, and he was bringing his crazy reforms at that time and whatnot. Now, the reason why this travel log is very fascinating is because, we have some travel logs or autobiographies, I should say, of certain scholars, maybe like 3-4 scholars of that specific era. But those scholars are like really big names of that time. Okay. Some really big names. But this Muhammad Hujjati Borujerdi is not really a very big name. He's just just a average student of Qom, and he's a scholar. He's a respected scholar, and he had his students and whatnot. He's a religious scholar. He's not pro Shah or anything like that, but he's not obviously a really big shot in Qom. He's not some grand marja or anything. So his experiences are very different than, let's say, a big marja writing a travel log or an autobiography. So this becomes even more interesting, right? So it's just a narrative of a normal student, not a high-ranking scholar, and just writing about the day-to-day things that were happening. Now, in this travel log or this autobiography, as I said, he writes about a lot of different things. And the way we figured out who wrote this book is that he had written this book at a much later age. Like, I think he wrote it when he was 74 something years old, in his 70s. And after he wrote it, he didn't put his name on it, but he kind of gave the manuscript of it to, I guess, some of his students or some of his family members. And one of his students happened to be the son of Ayatullah Sheikh Haeri Yazdi, basically Murtaza Haeri. Murtaza Haeri is the son or one of the sons of Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi. Haeri Yazdi is the founder of the Hawza of Qom. So the son of the founder of the Hawza of Qom was also one of the students of Muhammad Hujjati. Like, he must have studied some classes with him. And when this manuscript came in the hands of Murtaza Haeri, he decided to publish it, and he kind of published it with his name. Okay. Now, what is interesting is that the part that I want to quote from this autobiography, so you can see, by the way, his sort of ID card here, if you want to call it, his ID card here on the side. Let me just open it up here. That's his ID card, and that's his picture, basically. He, in one section, writes that on Wednesday, March 6th, 1929. Okay, Wednesday, March 6th, 1929, the Iranian government passed a law saying that students will have to be examined in order to get a certification. And based on this certification, they can kind of have two things can happen for them. They will get 2 exemptions. One is that they do not have to wear, they are allowed to wear the clothes of the scholars, meaning they are allowed to wear the turban. And secondly, they will not have to do mandatory military service, or what they call conscription. Okay, so wait, what is this? What is he talking about? Just a little bit of background history over here. When Reza Shah came into power after the Qajar dynasty, okay, when basically Reza Shah, the Shah of Iran, the first Shah of Iran in the last century, when he came into power, he brought certain reforms. And one of those reforms was this law that was passed in the late 1920s. It was called the law of the uniform dress. Okay, muttahid shakl. Okay, libas muttahid shakl, meaning the libas, the clothing which is a uniform. Okay, so it's sort of everyone has to dress the same way. And the purpose of this, so obviously, by the way, this law itself can probably become a whole different dictations on its own. This law itself, why did Reza Shah want to do this, implement this law? Obviously, he was impressed by the West. He had visited the West, and he had even visited Turkey, that was sort of being secularized at that time. So he was impressed, and one of the things he said that, we have to change the dress code because we want to look more like Europeans. So one of the things that he forced by law was that he forced all the men to wear this sort of suit and trousers, very similar to what many Iranians actually wear today. Because you notice they wear a suit with a dress shirt and like this trouser pants, and he made that as a law. And also you had to wear a hat, okay, this European hat that you had to wear. So initially he had to wear a hat called the Pahlavi hat. Then he changed it to this European hat. Anyways, as I said, if you want to talk about this law, it's a whole different discussion, and it's very interesting story. That itself is a very interesting dictation, basically. Anyways, he made this law and he passed the bill, and part of that was that all the scholars had to also take off their turbans and their garb, and they had to also look like everybody else in Iran. And the only way you were allowed to maintain your scholarly garb, meaning the turban in particular, and the sort of aba, let's say, was if you had given an exam. So this exam was initiated by the state. Okay, there was no such thing as exams in the Hawza like this, the way it's going to happen now, which is what this entire dictations is going to be about. I want to talk about the history of standardized exams in the Hawza. Inshallah, this is what the dictations is about. But this is how it started. The whole reason why these exams started in the Hawza is because of this one specific rule. Or you could say two rules. Other rule was basically conscription, but this one was more sort of predominant, right? This is more like you're asking scholars to sort of take away their garb, and for the scholars this means a lot. So anyways, as I said, we can talk a lot about this specific rule on its own. There are some interesting treatises written even at that time by anti-Shah scholars and religious scholars who were kind of saying, it's okay to change the clothes. Like the clothing itself is not a symbol and a sign of a scholar, and so on and so forth. Anyways, as I said, that can be a whole different discussion. But this created problems, and in order to verify that a scholar has basically a person is sort of excluded and exempt from this law, is that they had to be either a marja or a scholar who had passed a certain test. Okay, otherwise there was a fine, and you could be imprisoned. So then now there are many stories, like some of the students would, in the daytime, they would escape into the gardens on the outskirts of Qom, and they would spend the entire day there so they would not get caught by the police, and they would come back in the nighttime in their dorms, and all sorts of stories have been recorded during this time. Inshallah, I will show you guys a timeline, so this entire timeline also becomes very clear. In that entire story, which we're going to go into more detail, this Muhammad Hujjati is speaking about when he had to give a test. Okay, he had to give a test. So he walks into this room, I guess, over here, and he's writing. Okay, so this is probably maybe in the early 1930s, maybe. He says, I went into the exam hall, and Ayatullah Khansari was the one who was taking the test. Okay, he was the sort of supervisor of that examination, and another Aqa named Agha al-Aqa, who was a scholar and had a lot of merit and virtues, was basically the one who was asking the questions. Basically, and he would open up the book anywhere and he would just kind of point to it, and he would ask any question he would want till you give the jawab. He said, for me, he opened up the book of Lum'a, Sharh of Lum'a, which is what we study even until today in the Hawza. He says he opened it up and I read it for him, and he sort of did some critique on me, the teacher, this Agha al-Agha, who's a scholar taking the test, and this Muhammad Hujjati says, well, I gave him a response back, and in fact, I ended up being correct, right? So he's just telling, he's like, I walked into this exam hall, and Ayatullah Khunsari was the supervisor of this examination, and this Agha al-Agha was taking the test from me, and he took the test from Sharh al-Lum'a. So Sharh al-Lum'a means that he was not a very senior student at this time. Sharh al-Lum'a is basically, you can say maybe almost like a bachelor's level exam. Like maybe he's just passing his bachelor's, so he can kind of go into this, what we will call today in the modern sort of terms, like he's probably giving this test to get into his master's, let's say, that's like a best way for me to explain it. So elsewhere, he says on one of the days of the exam, it was a written exam. So some of them are oral tests, and some of them, then there's also a written component of it. So he says we went to write a written exam, and Agha Murtaza Haeri was sitting in the sort of like he was there in the first row of the students, where besides this room where the people who were taking the assessments were sitting. They had the people who would take the assessment had their own office and their own room. They would be sitting there, and we were all sitting facing the Qibla, and we were waiting for them to say the questions, and so we can write down the answers. So this Aqa named Zul Majdain came out of the room, came out of the office, and had all these question papers, exam papers in his hand, and he kind of like, he's giving these papers. So we said salam to him, and he said, you students are very sort of arrogant, sitting right in the beginning, or right facing this way. So the students say that, Ustad, we are sort of facing the Qibla. So this teacher, the guy who's taking the assessment, basically he said, فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Wherever you sit, Allah is there. Like, you don't have to sit facing the Qibla in this specific exam hall. Wherever you sit, Allah is there. And he said that we also gave a rebuttal to them, and we said, أَيْنَمَا تَكُونُوا فَوَلُّوا وُجُوهَكُمْ شَطْرُ الْمَسْجِدِ الْحَرَامِ. Wherever you happen to be, then turn your faces towards the Masjid al-Haram, basically towards the Qibla. So this guy, Agha Darakhshan, basically, he said to Agha Zul Majdain, Agha Zul Majdain was the one who was saying this things to the students. So Agha Darakhshan says to him, these are students, stop arguing with them. They will they have ways to respond to you. Anyways, he said, we gave the exam, and we finished the exam. It was the final exam of that year, and some of us got our certificate basically. This was just something that I wanted to start off with to show that there are these, this is a very interesting travel log, and this exam was such a big and interesting phenomenon that this scholar writes about it in his experiences, because these students had never experienced anything like this, that you're supposed to go into some exam hall and there's going to be an oral exam and a written exam, and these big scholars are going to sit there and actually test you, and they have this standardized exam format for it. Anyways, that is something that I wanted to share with. Now I'm going to actually show you all by the way, so this is how they were supposed to dress like. If you were not exempt from the law, you had to dress like this. Okay, so imagine a student of the Hawza, he is forced to take off his garb, and he's forced to wear clothing like this. For many of them, it would be embarrassing. It would not be really part of their culture and tradition and so on. But this timeline, I'm going to actually pull it up on my browser, because I kind of use this AI thing to make it. And I'm going to kind of just go through this timeline first, because as the episode or this dictation continues, you can kind of maybe follow along with it. Look, in 1925 to 1941, Reza Shah basically rules Iran. Okay? 1925 to 1941 is his rule. So he comes in 1925. In 1926, 1929, March 6th, 1929, till the end of his rule, 1941, this law of uniform dress existed, okay, in Iran. It was a law. It was passed in the parliament, and it was there, and it had like, I think, 20 articles of different rules and conditions mentioned in it. That is also published, and we have all those articles of the rule, and who's exempt and who's not exempt, and how much fines there has to be. As I said, this law itself can have another entire dictation. There's so much about this written. So this specific rule, there's a lot written about it, but the exam side of it is not much written about it. So you have this law that was passed, okay? Now they say that this law was actually brought up in around 1928, but it was officially passed in 1929, and it was immediately in effect in the major cities. But they said you have about a year or so to implement and enforce it in the villages, because they said, it will take time for us to enforce this in the villages, but in the major cities, it went into effect immediately, okay? Now, in order to determine who is exempt from this, right, they said, well, certain muhaddithin and certain scholars and maraji, and those maraji who have done tasdeeq of certain students, they are going to be allowed to also they don't have to wear the uniform dress, okay? So what happens is, in order to verify that, the Ministry of Education and all of that in Iran basically introduces these standardized exams in the Hawza for the very, very first time. And this is the time where Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi is actually still alive. Abdul Karim Haeri Yazdi, he is still alive. He is the founder of the present day Hawza of Qom. He is the one who really, really reconstructed it and revived it and so on. And he is still alive in 1929. He will pass away in 1937, January 1937. So he is alive. And for him, obviously, it's going to be something very new. And he has to deal with it politically. Now, the thing is, Reza Shah and the government were saying that we will take the exam. Some of our government officials will take the exam, and you can have 1-2 scholars sitting there and they can kind of monitor it, or maybe they can even take the exam, but our guys will be in the exam hall at all times. So Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi disagreed with this. He says, no, if you want us to give the exams, well, these are all the houses under me and the houses under my control, and these students are sort of all at my disposal. I know what we study. I know what is covered in the Hawza. I will basically pick the people who will take the exams. Okay, I will set all that stuff. So there was a little bit of back and forth that happened over here. Inshallah, we will show you some memos that went back and forth between him and the government and so on. I will show you some of the letters. But that's kind of what happened. So eventually what ended up happening is that Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi had appointed people to take exams, and that's what happened. So even at this time, like Ayatullah Mar'ashi Najafi and some other big guys, they had all given their exams in this era. Okay, all the way until Abdul Karim Haeri Yazdi, he passes away in 1937. In 1937 so from when he passes away, from 1937 to 1944. There is no one single figure that is running the Hawza. And the seminary came under the control of 3 big major scholars. So you had Ayatullah Sadruddin al-Sadr, who is the father of Musa Sadr. You have Ayatullah Muhammad Hujjati, and you had Ayatullah Muhammad Taqi Khansari. Okay, these 3, as I said, each of these scholars has their own life and history and efforts and contributions and so on. Each of these they're giant scholars in their own respect basically. But they had control over the Hawza during this period from 1937 to 1944. Now Reza Shah finishes his reign finishes in 1941. So if his finishes in 1941, the standardized exams also finish after that. This is kind of important. The standardized exams are going to finish because remember, the purpose of the exams was just to get an exemption so that you don't have to go to conscription and you don't have to wear the uniform, the hat and the suit and stuff. That was the only reason why you even had to give the exams. It was nothing to do with checking your skills or anything like that. The purpose of it was not to see whether you actually know your stuff. I mean, you had to know your stuff to get that certificate, but the purpose of that test was not for that. The purpose of it was so you can get an exemption. So this is kind of very important because obviously the exams that are kind of taken today in the Hawza or that are even going to be taken later on after the first Shah, the purpose of them is going to change, right? You're not going to give the exams because you want to wear the garb of the ulama. No, there will be different reasons for it. So during this period where the Shah had finished, his reign had finished, and this law also kind of became abolished, these three Ayatollahs, there was nothing happening formally in terms of examinations. But Ayatollah Sadruddin al-Sadr, they say that he was still sort of pushing for some form of assessments, at least in the schools that he was controlling. And the curriculum and the school and the program that he had, he continued to take some sort of assessments and exams from students. So that means that initial examination that was introduced by the state, he didn't seem to completely disagree with that idea, right? And over here you will find many, many stories and anecdotes from that era, and even from the later era when Ayatullah Borujerdi will come, that say that there was sort of a problem where a lot of people who were sort of not studying and they were not well read and they were just kind of wasting time in the Hawza. So there was no way to figure out who was actually a real good student and who was just wasting time. So one of the ways to figure that out was to do a test, so you can see who's actually studying, who's not studying, right? So that is kind of what was happening. But once again, nothing formal, and there was nothing sort of tied to like the Ministry of Education or anything of that sort. It was just an informal process that was maybe retained and implemented, particularly by Ayatollah Sadruddin. Okay, that is kind of important here. So I've written, informal exams are held from 1941 all the way till 1949. Okay. Now, in 1944, Ayatullah Borujerdi will arrive in Qom. Right? He goes to Tehran. He has a little bit of a surgery there in the hospital, and then on his way back, they finally convince him to come to Qom, and they said, "Look, take over, and we need somebody in the Hawza, senior person in the Hawza." Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi had invited him as well at that time. He was saying, after I pass away, someone needs to come, but Ayatollah Borujerdi didn't want to accept that offer at that time. Even after that, some of the Ayatollahs requested him to come, but he wasn't convinced. At this time, he was convinced, and he finally came to Qom in 1944. The changes that he will make and reformations that he will make in the Hawza and in the structure of the Hawza and making sure students are studying and all of that, that's going to start happening a little bit later, right? So from 1944 to 1949, whatever, things are happening. But in 1949, he will create 3 committees. And inshallah, at the end of this episode, I will go through the letter and I will tell you what these 3 committees are. 2 of these committees had to do with taking examinations. At this time, in 1949, formal exams are once again introduced by Ayatollah Borujerdi. And they become part and parcel of the Hawza system from that time until today. But the biggest change that will happen at the time of Ayatollah Borujerdi is that it will be linked with the stipend, with the Shahriya. Because they said that people just come to the hawza and they know they're getting paid, but we can't tell who is really studying and who is just kind of coming here for the sake of the little bit of money that they get and kind of just, living. And, parents that are from poor income families, they kind of just send off their kids to the hawza. And that's one less person to feed in the family, and they say the hawza will take care of these kids, but the kids are not serious about their studies. But the money is being spent on these students. They're getting paid a stipend. Obviously, it's not that much, it's almost nothing, but it's still something, right? Why should these students have the right to the stipend if they're not even serious about their studies, and it's just wasting the funds of the hawza? So Ayatullah Borujerdi, he says, well, one of the ways to figure out who's serious, who's not serious, is basically give them assessments and let's set up an examination system. And whoever passes these exams, then they get to the next level and their stipend will also increase. And in this era, the era of Ayatullah Borujerdi, you finally have this system which exists until today. It's basically this 10-layer system that exists in the Iranian hawzas. And at each level, you give certain tests, certain exams, and your shahriya, your stipend, keeps increasing, little by little by little. So if you're in the first level, you have a certain stipend. Once you pass that first stage, you go to the second stage, third stage, fourth stage. Oh, and each stage has different books that are required for you to pass, and you have to give assessments on those. All the way, eventually, you get to Bahthul Kharij or Dars Kharij, which is the advanced level. Ijtihad, basically where you learn how to do actual ijtihad and so on. Then there are examinations that happen over there as well. But the actual examinations that are there in the preliminary stages to the middle stages, that entire system was developed and created in the time of Ayatullah Borujerdi. But it is linked with your stipend, okay? And that is the system that we have until today. Now, in this episode, I will not talk about what happens after 1979. So look, after the revolution happens in Iran, a lot more things are going to happen, okay? And a lot more changes are going to happen in the hawza, but because it's going to get super, super long, I did not want to discuss that part of the history of examinations in the hawza and whatnot. We will just discuss this first stage before the revolution, what happened. Otherwise, after the revolution, tons of changes and reforms happen in the hawza, and until today things are happening and conversations are happening and whatnot. But let's stick to the earlier history for now, inshallah. So that is the timeline. But now let's come back to the slides. So this picture I wanted to share here is here, and this timeline is also over here. You can see the timeline, it's the same timeline. Now, this is some interesting pictures I took. I don't even remember where I took these, to be honest. I mean, it was probably in some museum. But these are pictures with names of students from 1952 who were basically, people who had signed up for giving the exams. It doesn't say what level exam it was, but these are all the names of the students. So they will write them down. This is from around 1952, maybe 1953, I'm not sure. But that's what it ends up being. 1371 Hijri is around 1952. So this is, at the time of basically Ayatullah Borujerdi, right? So Ayatullah Borujerdi dies in 1961. So this is 10 years before Ayatullah Borujerdi passes away. Now, let's go to the actual, beginning. Remember, before, in the past, what would happen in the hawza? How would you figure out that a student of a seminary is actually a qualified scholar? If there were no exams before the 20th century, then what was happening before that for 13 centuries, right? Whether it's Shia hawzas or Sunni hawzas or Ismaili hawzas or Zaydi madrasas, like what was happening in the Muslim world? How did they figure out which scholar is, which person actually studied and which one did not study? Well, it was a little bit different at that time. One of the ways that you could kind of vouch for someone is you would kind of see whether they have received an ijaza of ijtihad or an ijaza of like a riwaya or have they received any praise from their contemporary scholars who are kind of well known and well rooted in their studies? That was maybe one way to identify someone. Other way to identify the strength of someone was to see what they have published, right? So that was very, very common. People wrote books, scholars wrote books and treatises, and they would critically engage with each other. And by publishing, you could kind of see, well, this is how much the scholar knows, or this is how, this is how weak they are. Otherwise, there's not going to be any way for you to figure out how strong they are. And it's possible there may be people who are super geniuses and super smart, but because they have not published anything and they have not written anything and they have not engaged with anyone, no one will really ever know if they were actually truly, scholarly or not. Only Allah will know, and only they will know, to whatever extent, and maybe some of their close associates will know, but no one else is going to know. Like, there has to be some way to be able to ascertain that. So that is really how it would happen in the past. There was no actual exam. It's not like people will go to an exam hall and get tested. There was no such concept like that. But there was sort of this understanding that, when you go through one level, the teacher can observe you. One other way would be kind of letting the student read back the book to the teacher. So if it was a hadith book, for example, they would basically do qira'ah of the book, the hadith book, back for the teacher. So the teacher would listen whether the student is reading correctly, are they understanding the hadith properly, or are they not understanding it properly. And based on that, maybe they will give them an ijaza, permission to narrate that tradition, or speak about the tradition and give a commentary on it and explain it to people and so on. That was pretty much it. Like, there was nothing much more complicated than that, right? There's nothing, it's nothing like today. Nothing like what's going to happen in, 1929 onwards. That's why it was all brand new. And inshallah, you will see that the House of Najaf actually said it's haram to do exams. In the time of Ayatullah Borujerdi, when he wanted to bring exams in the House of Qom, he also asked for it to happen in Najaf. Because the stipend was connected to that. So he didn't want people to be studying in the House who were not even serious, just taking the money. So unfortunately, some of the big ulama of Najaf said it's haram to take exams and to give exams. So they never had exams, and until pretty much even now, they don't have those sort of examinations that the way they happen in the Iranian houses. Not to say that there's no exams at all. No, there is some sort of assessment, and even in the House of Najaf, but not like the way they happen in Qom, right? So if you're interested in that, you can speak to some of the students who study in Najaf, right? So now, let's go back to here. So we talked about Reza Shah's reforms. So let's go to this. Where's the slides? Right here. There are a bunch of interesting memos from that time. So remember 1929, this law came into existence, and probably by 1930 they were already taking the exams and whatnot. So in 1933, there is a letter that is sent from Qom. So July 21st, 1933, a letter is sent basically to the Interior Ministry saying that there is some people who have given the exams, who have passed the examination, but it has been 2 years for some of them, and they have yet not received their certificate. They have not received their sort of this exemption letter or this license, right? They have not received it. I will show you a picture of an exemption letter right near the end of this PowerPoint, but it was like this license with like your picture on it. So these two memos are basically saying, how come you haven't sent the the letters yet? So, and then there's another one written on July 25th, 1933. I'm not going to read all of them, but basically he says, they are saying that, look, Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi is, kind of getting upset now, and he's kind of upset because some of these students have to kind of go for traveling, and they have to travel outside of Qom, or they have to go for tabligh, for example, and they cannot go they want to wear their libas and go. So if they wear their libas and go, and then someone checks them and they don't have a license, well, then they can get into trouble. So he says over here, for example, this letter says 1933, some of the students have given the exams, and they gave the exams in the presence of the people from the government, from the Interior Ministry. And it was everything was according to law, and there was no law that was broken. And they were passed, and they were given this sort of, they passed the exams. But it has been 2 years that the permit has not been given to them. Okay, and this has really hurt the heart of Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi. He's kind of upset, like, what's going on? He's upset. It's kind of important to understand this, because the Shah, one of the reasons why he was doing this is to kind of also weaken the Hawza, the scholarship basically, and kind of just get everybody to he's trying to weaken the Hawza. And by the way, he did end up weakening the Hawza in terms of the quantity, right? After all these rules and regulations came into place, the number of madrasas in Iran, they declined, number of students in the Hawza declined, and a lot of push was happening towards these public schools, or this modern schools that were popping up, and universities and so on. So he did end up harming to some extent, the Hawza at that time, and the numbers dropped and so on. But at the end of the day, like, these students who were part, and the thing is, Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi knew this, and that's why he was very sort of adamant that these students, at the very least, like, who have passed the exams, at least give them the permit. What are you guys waiting for? And he's writing these letters. But anyway, I will quote some anecdotes to show you how in some of the exams these scholars were actually helping some of the students, right? And you can say, well, what, like, that's cheating. That's cheating. But it's interesting that maybe they did not perceive it as cheating, because they were saying, the reason why the government is enforcing the exams is so that students can sort of leave the Hawza, and that will weaken the system. So out of expediency and out of greater sort of benefit, sometimes they will tell them the questions beforehand. The night before, they'll say, tomorrow we will ask you about these topics. Just prep for them and be ready for it. Or sometimes, they will kind of walk into the exam hall, and if students are writing a paper, they'll kind of just let them know, maybe think about it this way. Maybe this is the answer. It was, done so that the students can pass the paper, and so the Hawza does not become weakened. And this brings up, inshallah, at the end of the episode we'll talk about, this brings up a question of, do these exams really mean anything at the end of the day? Do they really show a scholar's credibility and credentials, or what do they really show at the end of the day? Anyways, let's move on. This is a correspondence with Mahmoud Jam, who was the Interior Minister at that time in 1933. Okay, so October 15, 1933, they send a letter to this Interior Minister saying that, look, there are some students who have been given the ijazah of ijtihad by Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi before this entire exam process even began. And they have been given the ijazah of ijtihad in a written format, and they have the ability to deal with the khums money and so on and so forth. Can they be given the license and the permit? Can they be given the permit so they don't have to sit through the exam? And because the exams obviously don't happen every day, like they happen maybe once a term, or like once or twice a year. So that, you're gonna make these scholars wait for like a whole year till the exam time comes, and then they will give the exam, and then there's already a backlog of permits in 2 years. So no, these are people that already have ijazah of ijtihad from Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi. So can you give it to them, and so that they can kind of wear the libas? This is the response of Mahmoud Jam on. So look, the letter was sent on October 15th, and the jawab came just a month later on November 13th. And he says, even though the acknowledgement of Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi, which is signed by himself, is mu'tabar, it is reliable, and it is sort of worthy, it's definitely worth something. In order to sort of receive the permit, we have to act according to the law, and only those students who have given the exams and have received the permit by the sort of ministry, they're the only ones who are going to get the permit exemption. Very interesting. And there is an interesting point here that you read in some of the anecdotes that even during this time, and even also during the time of the second Shah, like the Shah of Iran, some of these ijazat of that time, like you have to be very careful to to say, oh, that person received an ijazah of ijtihad from Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi. You have to be careful, like maybe some of these ijazat were just given due to maslahat, due to expediency and benefit for the greater sort of cause, and to make sure the hawza is not weakened. But in reality, maybe those people were not really at the level of ijtihad that Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi would have expected them to be, and who he would really have given the ijazah of ijtihad. But maybe they were a little bit weaker in their ijtihad, or maybe did not even have full ijtihad at that time. But to kind of save them, and because they were important people, they were scholars at the end of the day. Just because they hadn't hit that specific level doesn't mean now Ayatullah Haeri will say, you know what, follow the law, and you don't have to wear the libas. You're not worth wearing the libas of the scholars. No, so in order to help them, maybe he created some of these ijazat of ijtihad. So that is there in some of the anecdotes. So you have to be a little bit careful when you cite some of the ijazat of ijtihad of the past in the last 100 years. You got to know the context. Was this a genuine one, or maybe this was for political reasons? That happens. Okay, so this is something that is it happens basically. Okay, what's going on in this slide? This is a long one. This in 1936. Now remember, Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi passes away the year after. 1937, he passes away. In 1936, there is a sort of change made in the exams. So what's happening here in this specific one? So this is this one, and there's also this one over here. So this next one is about the change of the exam location from Tehran to Qom. But this one here is that basically some of the government officials come from the ministry, and they're saying we're gonna take the exams in the Fayziya Madrasa, and Ayatollah Shaykh Haeri Yazdi was really, really upset, and he basically said no one should be giving the exam. So the sort of the lead person from the ministry, he reports it to the ministry and other people, and then they eventually go to Ayatollah Shaykh Haeri Yazdi, who is actually just chilling in this village called Keiku. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Keikuviye or Keikuviye. I don't know. I have actually not been to this one. This is near Kahak. Actually, let's pull it up quickly so you can see where this is. Okay, so this is the village right here, Rustaye Keikuye. Okay, I don't know how to pronounce this, but if you notice, that's the village, and where's Qom? So this is Qom. Okay, so usually like people go like Virjan and Vishnave. I've been Vis. We've been. And then you've gone to basically, where's Kahak? Kahak is where Mullah Sadra's house is. Can't even find it right now, but anyway, Kahak is right here. So this is Kahak. So he was in basically, Kirmejegan. I've been as well. So these are very interesting, just villages on the outskirts of Qom. But Ayatollah Haeri Yazdi is chilling in some garden over here. Okay, probably went there for fresh air or something. You can even see some of the, pictures and stuff over here. So that is where he was. So they're having a meeting with him in this village. The ministry people go all the way to him to meet him in this village, and he says he was just there to for like a change of atmosphere. He went there for fresh air, and they asked him, why did you cancel these exams? Maybe there's a misunderstanding and so on, and so on. So he says to them that because the Persian empire and the country at the end of the day is an Islamic country, it needs representatives of the religion. And who are those representatives? They are the students, like students of the Hawza. They are the ones who are going to teach the people the religion, and they are the ones who are going to teach the people what Islam expects them to do, and so on and so forth. And therefore, all the things that have to do with the madrasa and their exams and their affairs should be under the observation of me. And the program and the curriculum and the syllabus and the assessments that I give need to be implemented, not the government. Remember, this is a time like the Hawza has never really been attached with the political system. It has always sort of been independent of it throughout history. So these are like very strange interference. Like for the Hawza, it's very strange. Like, why is the government getting involved in the affairs of the Hawza? So he's saying the Wazarat-e-Ma'arif, the sort of education ministry, that's the name that they had back then, should not interfere in this affairs. And whatever I tell them, should be done. And I will be the one who will appoint those who will give the test. So this is something that happened. And then eventually there's another situation that happened where 1936, there's a change of exam location from Tehran to Qom. And once again, Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi calls it out. He says, no way, there is no way students are going to go, okay? And he basically prevents the students from going and so on. This is another sort of dilemma that happens. And then finally, I'll share this one more image over here. This is from also 1936. It is also discussing the whole idea of, it's the same story about why Ayatullah Haeri is stopping the exams in Qom, what's going on, and they're basically discussing with him, why are you stopping the exams? Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi is telling them why I'm stopping the exams, and he's basically saying, I'm the one who will appoint the people who will give the exam. By the way, in this letter, it is the same two people's names here, Aghay Darakhshan and Zul Majdain, right in the first line. The same two people that this Shaykh Muhammad Hujjati Borujerdi mentions. He says, I went to the exam hall and Aghay Zul Majdain and Darakhshan were there, and they came out of the office. And if you look at this memo, it is the same memo, and he mentions that these two people were discussing with Shaykh Haeri Yazdi, and basically eventually they will be the ones who will also take the test. Anyways, this is the permit from the Interior Ministry, and this is the Warqa Tasdeeq, basically a certificate of acknowledgement that, and this is the name of the person, and based on this ijazat-name, based on this permit, they are excused with article number 4, or basically the line number 4 from article 2 or whatever 3 of the rule of Muttahidu Shakl Namudane Albase Dar Poshidane Libas Ruhani Majaz Khahan Bud, that they are basically exempt from the law of uniform dress. And that is how the permit looked like. So very, very interesting storyline of what happened. Now, what's next? Alright, so I have some anecdotes that I have recorded here. I did not put them in these slides. I'll just kind of read them. These are from different books basically that I kind of collected from them. But just these are two anecdotes from the time of Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi. One of them says that there's a scholar named Ayatullah Sheikh Abdul Hussein Gharavi, who says that Haj Sheikh, meaning Haeri Yazdi, did not go against this introduction of the standardized exams by the regime, okay? But he said, I will be responsible for determining who is going to take the exams, okay? And he appointed Aghay Sayyid Ahmad Zanjani. The Sayyid Ahmad Zanjani is the same scholar. He's the father of Ayatollah Shubairi Zanjani. And if any of you follows Mizan Institute and the podcasts, and I have a podcast called The 40s, that 40s is based on the book by this same Sayyid Ahmad Zanjani. So you can imagine he was a big shot scholar at that time, if Ayatollah Haeri is appointing him as one of the people who will take the exams. Okay? So he says that he put him as somebody to take the exam so that it is not at the under the control of the people of the regime, right? Because they're just going to try and fail everyone. Over there, Aghay Sadr, okay, the same Ayatollah Sadruddin, the father of Musa Sadr, they were also there to take the exams. And when he would kind of walk around between the students during the exam, he would quietly sometimes also help some of them. And in the oral exam, one night before, he would kind of tell them that, listen, we're going to give you questions from these topics. as mushtaq wa hujjiyat wa zan, so these are topics in usul al-fiqh that we will ask you questions from these topics. Why would they help these students? Because chun nazar bar in bud ke hauze ra hifz kunim, the whole thing that they had is the regime has implemented these exams to weaken the hauza, to kind of get rid of all of these students and basically lower our numbers and weaken us basically. Very similar to what Saddam Hussein did, by the way. Saddam did the same thing. He eventually emptied out the Hauza of Najaf and it became weak. It was non-existent in the 90s and in the late 80s and 90s it was finished, right? So only now it has kind of revived after the war, and after 2003-4 it kind of revived again. But in Saddam's time it was pretty much done, right? So these people were thinking that regime is going to do the same thing over here. I mean, this is before Saddam, obviously, but they understood what Reza Shah is trying to do. So they were like, you know what, we're going to help some of these students. So the more students can remain in the Hauza, the better it will be for us. And so he says, because Reza Shah and the government wanted to use the exams as an excuse to finish the Hauza. Okay. Anyways, that's one of the stories. But this story, second one, is very interesting. This is from Ayatullah Zanjani. He says, I heard that Aqai Haj Shaykh Abdul Karim Haeri, when he set up the exams, Ayatullah Shaykh Muhammad Araki. Ayatullah Shaykh Muhammad Araki is one of the biggest marjas of the last century. Okay, this is a big scholar. So he's also saying, Agha Zanjani is also saying that I heard that Ayatullah Shaykh Muhammad Araki, with that greatness and that sort of fadila that he had, he failed the exam. Right? And he says that this shows that exams are not really the criteria. Sometimes, the person taking the exam, they're just being unnecessarily tough, or the exam itself is not created properly and it results in the student, failing. Because nobody really denies that nobody denies Ayatullah Shaykh Muhammad Araki is a grand marja of that time. But he's saying, look, he failed the exam, right? So I'm going to mention this point again at the end. So that is the first part of this presentation, which had to do with the history of exams at the time of Ayatullah Haeri Yazdi. Now, as I said, after Reza Shah's reign ended and the Hauza came into the hands of three other Maraje, informal exams, maybe they were happening in some places, but nothing formal and nothing linked with the government or education or interior ministry or anything like that, until Ayatullah Borujerdi will come to Qom. Okay, until he comes to Qom. Let me open up the timeline again so you know where we are now, right? Or maybe I should just open it up in the here, not over here, here. Okay, so until Ayatullah Borujerdi arrives in Qom, he will create a committee. Now, what committee is this? Let me open up the link. So this is from Imam Khomeini's official website. There is this memo. So Ayatollah Imam Khomeini has they have this book called Sahifa Imam. It is a very lengthy, I don't know how many volumes it is. It's many volumes where they have collected everything from Imam Khomeini, from his letters and memos and speeches and articles and works, and everything you can imagine is actually in it, right? So over there are these two very interesting memos, right? And I'm not going to go through all of them. The link is here. You can look it up, right? They send a question to Ayatollah Borujerdi, and anyway, Ayatollah Borujerdi responds to them again. They're saying, what's going on? Like, what are you doing? You're creating these committees, but we heard about it, but you haven't made it clear for us. Over here, he explains, I don't have to explain everything openly in public, blah, blah, blah. Anyways, this second letter over here says that I'm creating 3 committees, and each committee is going to have a specific responsibility. What are these committees? Hayati Barai Rasidagi Amr Tullab Madaris. A committee that will kind of look after the affairs of the student affairs and school affairs. Okay, do the students need anything? What do the students need? Are they, struggling with the money, income, food, any other type of help that they need? What do the schools need? What type of supports and resources do the schools need? Do they need teachers? Anyways, that committee is going to be there, and you can see many big names in this committee, right? Sayyid Ahmed Khansari and Sayyid Ayatullah, like Muhammad Reza Gulpaygani. These are people who will become literally Ayatullahs afterwards, right? Sayyid Ahmed Zanjani's name is still mentioned over there. Murtaza Haeri, who's the son of Haeri Yazdi, and so on. Okay. Now, there's going to be a second committee. And this committee is the committee that will take the exam of students who are in Darsul Kharij, okay, which is a very advanced level, like ijtihadi level exam. Who's going to be here? It's going to be Agha Murtaza Haeri, Agha Sayyid Muhammad Yazdi, and Agha Haj Agha Ruhollah Khomeini. So look, this is very interesting. Imam Khomeini at this time is being appointed to take exams of students who are giving the exam for Dars Kharij. Okay, that's pretty advanced. I mean, it shows his level at that time, because you can only take exam of Dars Kharij if you are someone very serious, right? You got to be someone who knows his stuff to be able to take exams in Dars Kharij. So Imam Khomeini is going to be at that level. Then you have a third committee who will take exams of basically students who kind of enter the Hawza from different cities and so on, but they are not at the Dars Kharij level. They're going to take the introductory exams or middle level exams, and you can see there's a lot more names mentioned over here. Usually you have more students as well giving exams over here, right? So, and then he says this has been approved and signed off by all of these big names. All of you have seen it. Once again, Imam Khomeini's name is also mentioned over here. So these three committees are created by Ayatullah Borujerdi in 1949. And so basically formal exams are introduced and linked with the stipend. Now, when the Hawza creates these exams, what will happen is your stipend is going to get linked with this. And basically you can only get more shahriya, more money, if you pass exams and you get to a higher level. And that system actually still exists until today. Okay, when you're in the bachelor's, you get a certain level of stipend. When you enter your master's level, you get a bit more. When you're in Dars Kharij, you get a bit more. So it increases, and then there are other elements that can kind of increase that as well. But that's more for contemporary times. Things have been updated even more. But I want to mention, some stories from the time of Ayatullah Borujerdi's time as well. Okay. Now look at this. This is very, very interesting. I'm quoting from, one of the students who had, one of the scholars who studied under Imam Khomeini and also under Ayatullah Borujerdi. And he is quoting the story. He says, for Ayatullah Borujerdi, if you wanted to give an exam for his classes, he didn't care about actually testing you. He wouldn't give you a written test. He would expect you to, write his durus in Arabic and to turn it into a booklet or a treatise of some sort, and then present it to the examiners, basically. Present it to them, and they can see your level. Did you understand the dars? Did you write it properly? Is your Arabic good? And how well did you understand the lessons? Okay, this is very, very interesting, because it honestly shows the creativity of Ayatullah Borujerdi. Right? He could have made standard exams, written exams, and you could have read it the night before and sort of just pass the test, which is very common, happens in every academic institute, right? You can kind of just not study the entire year, and a week before or night before you can pull an all-nighter, pass the test. It can happen in the Hawza as well. It happens all the time in every academic institute. Ayatullah Borujerdi is kind of doing what is kind of called a formative assessment, meaning in order to pass his exam, you kind of have to remain on top of the lessons throughout the entire year. You cannot cram this or pull an all-nighter on this. So look, this is a very interesting way of Ayatullah Borujerdi making sure the students are strong. Okay, and then after you did that, he would also then there will be an oral test as well. Okay, so he says another way to figure out who had passed the test of certain scholars, like to know that you had passed the test of Imam Khomeini, we could figure out people whose shahriya, whose stipend went from 45 tomans to 60 tomans. Okay, If your Shahriya went from 45 tomans to 60 tomans, that means you had passed the exam of Imam Khomeini. Okay, Imam Khomeini tested you and you have passed that exam basically. Now this one is from Ayatullah Muntaziri. He says Ayatullah Sayyid Sadruddin was also before Ayatullah Borujerdi, he had also started to think about this exam system, which I have already mentioned a couple of times, right? Before Ayatullah Borujerdi, Sadruddin was kind of pushing this idea of examinations, and he had linked it with the Shahriya, but he didn't have that level of he was not able to implement it and enforce it in the Hawza in general. Ayatollah Muntaziri says that, look, I remember at that time the exams were not normal in the Hawza, and some people did not even want to give these exams. So he said, then Ayatollah Sayyid Sadruddin said that, well, whoever will give these exams, we will increase their Shahriya, until Ayatollah Borujerdi came and it became a mainstream thing. And over there, the people who will who will take the exams were Marhum Imam Khomeini and Marhum Aqil Sayyid Ahmad Zanjani. So these two would take the exams, right? So it's very interesting. Like, imagine going into a hall and Imam Khomeini is going to take your exam, right? That's kind of pretty scary. And very interestingly, I had a very similar experience myself in Qom. In 2017, we were doing philosophy, Bidayatul Hikmah, in our school as a normal credit that you have to study philosophy. But we always tried to do extra classes outside of the main curriculum as well. And we would try to always do it with some sort of specialist or something like that. That was a very common thing that we did during our studies. Never rely and suffice with just the basic curriculum. So what we did, long story short, we kind of got in touch with Agha Mujtaba Misbah, who is the son of Ayatullah Misbah Yazdi. And we tried to ask him for a private teacher from Muassasa Imam Khomeini, which is one of the major schools of institutes where they teach philosophy and stuff. And we said, look, we want a teacher that, we don't really want to study a textbook line by line. We want to take topics and kind of do research on it and present it to the teacher. It was a bit more sort of advanced way of studying philosophy, because we were already doing the basics in the school, Bidayatul Hikmah, wanted to go one step higher. So he said, well, I will give you a teacher and I will only approve you for a private class in this muassasa if Ayatullah or Agha Ghulam-Reza Fayyazi gives you permission. Now, Agha Ghulam-Reza Fayyazi is a very senior philosopher in Qom, okay, one of the major philosophers in Iran, but he has his own ideas and theories on Sadrian philosophy and whatnot. Actually, one of his interviews that was done by this channel brother called brother Sheikh Hadi al-Lawati, and he has this channel called Al-Hayra. He had interviewed Shaykh Ghulam-Reza Fayyazi, and I've translated the transcript and it's on Iqra. I will share it in the description below. He says you have to go to him and he has to give you permission. So we finally booked a meeting with him, and it was a long thing how we booked a meeting with him. Finally, we met him in his in this office. It was just me and maybe 2-3 other brothers and Sheikh Fayyazi. And we just thought we're gonna show him our face, and he'll be like, oh, nice, Western students, and he'll give us a very good teacher. When we went, salam, dua, how's everything, blah, blah, blah. So he says, yeah, so before I can kind of give you guys permission, I'm going to test you guys. And at that time, I almost got a heart attack, because I was like, oh my God, this is, like one of the greatest philosophers in Iran is going to test us, like test me on philosophy. Like, what on earth? He can probably find like a million mistakes in anything I'm going to say. So I got extremely nervous, and I'm sure so did my colleagues. They got very, very nervous. And he said, does anyone have Bidayatul Hikmah on them? Because I want to test you from that. Now, funny thing is, I had Bidayatul Hikmah in my bag, but I was so scared I did not even say anything. I was like, I'm not going to tell him I have it, because, he's going to pull it out, he's going to test us. So I thought, because there's no Bidayatul Hikmah in that office that we were in, he will kind of say, oh, whatever, it's okay, it's okay. He says, no, I'm going to go to his own personal office, which was literally like a 5-minute walk maybe. It was because the mosque is very big. and I will bring the bidayah from there. I was like, oh my God, is he really gonna do that? He did it. He left this office that we were in. He walked all the way to his own office. He was trying to find bidayah, and finally he found a copy. He comes back to our daftar, and I was the first one. He gives me the book, tells me open up, I don't know, chapter 6 or something of bidayah it was. He's like, start reading. So I read, and as I said, I was extremely nervous. I'm still remembering that time. I'm even nervous right now. I don't know why. But anyways, I read the entire paragraph. So he was checking for your Arabic, and then he asked 2-3 questions from that page, and alhamdulillah, I was able to explain it. And then he tested other 2-3 friends, and after that, alhamdulillah, it was all good. Like, we passed the test. And a week later, we went back to Agha Mujtaba Misbah, and they assigned us a teacher. Basically, the teacher was one of the major students of Agha Fayyazi. So we did philosophy with him privately in Muassasa Imam. But I'm just sharing this because that experience of kind of being in front of a really giant scholar, and then they're going to test you on a topic that they have spent their entire life on. And in fact, they are one of the major specialists of that field in the Hawza. For them to come and say, I will test you, it's very scary. So that's kind of like, I'm saying, like, imagine going into an exam hall and Imam Khomeini is going to test you on fiqh and usul. Like, you better be I don't know how these people had like the nerves to do that. It's a very you get nervous even thinking about that. So anyway, so what I want to wrap this discussion up with, there's so much on this topic that I'm like not even talking about because it can get very long. It's already very long. So 1 hour 15 minutes. Maybe I have to figure out a way to, I don't know, have to figure out a way to maybe make it shorter or maybe split it into 2 parts or something. I don't know. But I don't have much time, unfortunately, usually to prepare these things. So once I prepare it, I just want to get it out of the way. So I just want to end with one final discussion over here. And that is that, look, if you notice, Ayatollah Zanjani said that Ayatollah Muhammad Ali Araki actually failed the formal exam. Yet he is recognized as one of the great marjas of the last century. Or it is famously said that Allama Tabatabai failed Suyuti. Suyuti is one of these Arabic grammar books. Apparently he failed it twice, but yet he, eventually passed it and eventually wrote one of the most important tafsir books of the last century. So it's like, what do these exams really prove at the end of the day? And that is kind of an important discussion. In the sort of field of education, they say that there are different types of assessments that you can take, right? Summative assessments, formative assessments, diagnostic and cumulative and so on. They have these terms for different types of assessments, but you can kind of break it down to 2 basic assessments. One is the summative assessment and one is what they call a formative assessment. A summative assessment is kind of what many of us may be used to it, and that is, a final exam basically. At the end of the term or at the end of the year, they will just test you on everything that you have learned. And it's usually this one written document, depending on how many pages, and they will test you on it, and they will, you're just supposed to know whatever you studied in that term. The issue with summative exams is that you can almost, if you know how the exam's gonna be, you can almost kind of just, study for that exam. You can just study the techniques on how I'm going to pass the exam rather than focus on the actual class and the subject itself. And it becomes very common for people to, take the course or take a course of study or, approach that course in a way where they are just interested in passing the final exam. They're not interested in the actual content. As long as they've passed the final exam and they move on to the next stage, for them, they've achieved success and that's fine. And the thing is, these summative exams cannot tell you anything about the strength of a student many times. Okay, not all the time. I think that in certain cases, summative exams can also tell you about the strength of a student, particularly if, like, let's say a student consistently gets low marks in certain subjects again and again and again, in final exams, final tests at the end of the year in usul or any field. It doesn't have to be a Hawza course. Like if in math class every single grade you get low grades at the end of the final exam, well, look, at a certain point it does indicate that you're weak in math. There's certain the lack of ability to answer some of the questions. Maybe you don't understand the math properly or whatever. Like it does perhaps indicate some level of weakness if it's consistently being done. But if it's like a one-off, you messed up on one of the exams, like one time in the Hawza, we had to take these optional classes, and this one was about some history about the formation of different sects and schools of thought. Now that's something like, I studied a lot, like in my own, even before Hawza, like I read a lot about that topic. So I kind of know that topic pretty well. But the exam was really like based on the book. So there was this one question that was given on that test. And, I maybe I just skimmed through the book. So the question, when it came, in my mind, there was an answer that I believed this question has that answer. I still remember the answer that I gave was, Wasil bin Ata. It was asking who was the first person who came up with some idea. So I said, yeah, Wasil bin Ata came up with this idea. Wasil bin Ata is, acknowledged as the founder of this Mu'tazili school of thought, and founder of even like Kalami discussions, theological discussions in the Muslim world. He lived from 80 Hijri to like maybe 130, 140 Hijri. So I wrote that down, and I didn't get it. I didn't get that answer right, and I lost marks on that paper and whatnot. And I argue with the teacher in the sense that but Wasil bin Ata is the person, and they said no, but the book says somebody else. So I said, well, if I can show you that through original books and primary research that Wasil bin Ata was the one who came up with this certain view. I don't remember what that view was. Will you change the grade? Anyways, I brought the references and whatnot. And, whatever happened afterward doesn't matter. So it doesn't really mean anything. But now imagine consistently I'm getting low marks in grammar, and I'm getting low marks in like legal theory and fiqh. I mean, that's the whole purpose you went to Qom for, or the Hawza for. If you are doing a marketing degree or an accounting degree and you consistently get low marks in these courses that are specialized for it, well, it does indicate that perhaps there's a weakness somewhere. Okay, either it's in your comprehension of the test or just your understanding of the concepts. There is, some weakness over there. So that's the sort of downfall, the shortcomings of summative exams. Another form of exam is basically the formative assessments, right? Formative assessments are kind of like when the teacher assesses you during the learning process. It's kind of almost like, when a chef is cooking, when they taste the food, they're testing the food while it's even, before it's even fully prepared. Whereas summative exam is like when the customer or the client or the guest is tasting the food. So formative assessment is while the learning is happening. Unfortunately, this is not really common in the seminaries. And even if some teachers do try to do that, it doesn't really have any bearing on your final mark, right? One of the teachers that I feel that really did this for me was actually our school principal. And I still remember this because it was such a good experience learning from him. It was Lum'a, and it was Kitabul Ijara, the book of rental, rent laws, basically, rental contract. And the ability of this teacher was that he would do a sort of formative assessment from day one. So the way he would do it is that he would kind of prompt us to answer fiqhi questions in class. Like he would ask us to do ijtihad in class. If Shahid Thani is saying something, he would tell us, Sayyid Ali, like, is this, argument correct or not? Like, refute it, give your fatwa. Obviously not a real fatwa, but like in class, he would push you to think critically about it. And if, you weren't able to answer, one time, okay, whatever. But if again and again and again, every single day, you're really unable to answer anything, then the kind of teacher can tell, okay, wow, you're not really getting the discussions. Right? And that gives a good indication to the teacher at the end of the day. So that was something that was such a good experience, learning, Kitab al-Ijara from him. And in fact, that teacher also forced us to teach one of the smaller books of Lum'a, right? that one fiqh class was so good, right? We did so many fiqh classes, but that one fiqh class stood out from all the rest of the fiqh classes because number one, there was formative assessments happening throughout the whole term, and second, he even encouraged us, and not encouraged, he forced us to teach one of the smaller books of Luma. So I remember the book I taught was Kitab al-Saq wa Rimaya, right? Nobody even looks at that book, It's the book about, because you can kind of bet on betting is haram, but you can kind of bet on horse racing and archery, and there are all these laws and stuff for it. I was tasked to teach that book basically to the whole class, and probably still have my notes. I even still have the audio recordings. So it forced me to kind of prepare and to teach and to get a solid grasp of the content so I can come and teach it in class, right? No other teacher ever did that, but that one teacher, it kind of strengthened us in class and whatnot. So this is kind of important. Obviously, at the Dars Kharij level and the more advanced level, the exams are a bit more holistic, right? They're expecting students to have a much more sort of intimate grasp of the discussions, of the principles, of the narrations, because at that level, it's ijtihadi level discussion. So they expect you to bring all of that into the picture and be able to answer questions. And those exams are also, either mostly oral, they're oral, and so on. But these summative exams that are very common in universities and even in the hawzat, what do they really tell you about the strength of the students, right? It's tough to say. As I said, if someone is consistently unable to get good grades in these exams and assessments, that does indicate that there is a problem, right? Because these exams, these standardized exams, they kind of show, and the purpose of them is to kind of identify your ability to read and understand Arabic. That's number one. And sort of the Arabic, do you even understand the language? And second is your ability to comprehend the technical passages from usul, from fiqh, from philosophy, from whatever subject, and can you critically engage with that passage? Because usually what happens is they give you a passage in these exams, they ask you to answer based on that passage, or explain what that passage is saying, explain the argument that the author is bringing. These are like 14th century fiqh books or 13th century manuals and whatnot. So these are classical texts. The Arabic is a little bit different. The technical jargon is different. So they're expecting you to address those questions, answer those questions. So if you're unable to answer the question, well, that means you either don't know Arabic, your reading is poor, or your reading may be fine, but you don't really understand what the scholar is saying. What else could it mean, right? So, but sometimes it's possible that the student really did study, they understand the material, but it just so happens that a certain passage from the book that they were supposed to give the exam on, they didn't really focus too much on it, or didn't really review that specific section. And that's the very section that came on the test. So they may not perform really good in it. Then at that point, the student himself knows that they're not weak, but it just so happened that they weren't prepared for this specific lesson, and maybe they did not understand the technicalities on it. Or sometimes, what also does happen is that the exam and the assessment itself is not prepared properly. It may be too vague, or the way it's phrased can be poor, and students kind of answer it based off of their understanding of the assessment, but the examiner may have another understanding of it, and then they will judge and grade you based off of their own understanding, right? So that can kind of happen in these papers and in these assessments. But overall, it seems that exams and assessments are not bad. They're good. They kind of keep you on your toes, but there are other problems that get created. For example, how do you avoid this idea of just kind of cramming everything the night before and being able to pass the paper? That means maybe the nature and the content of those papers should change in a bit, where students cannot really pull that off. Like if you look at Ayatullah Borujerdi's style, which is very interesting, like he's expecting you to take transcriptions in Arabic of his lessons and then present it to him at the end of the term. That's a very good way of making sure students are on their toes and they're coming to class and they're paying attention, and you can also see their understanding. And what's more important is that he's expecting them to do it in Arabic, right? And that's kind of like very weak, unfortunately, for many students. Like they cannot Forget writing, like many of them cannot even read, unfortunately. So this is something that you can kind of take inspiration from Ayatullah Borujerdi and maybe implement it in the system. Likewise, when it comes to the history of exams before this idea of standardized exams came into existence, even going back to this idea of publishing and writing treatises and writing, critiquing with other texts, that should also be encouraged, right? Now, that's not a formative assessment or a summative assessment per se, but it kind of, under the guidance of scholars and stronger scholars, you can encourage students to, at least the initial stages, you can encourage students to engage with other texts, get them to write something, get them to publish something, right? That is also, unfortunately, very weak. Many people cannot even write today. I mean, I teach at a school, so I have seen the how writing skills have weakened, especially in the modern day and age. Kids cannot even write anymore. The writing skills are becoming weak in many schools, and public school standards are very low now as well. So this entire next generation is going to be pretty weak as they grow up in their literacy skills and their math skills. So you have to be kind of careful. And the Hausa can do a very good job at improving and polishing and refining those skills. But it can happen if these novel ways of assessing students and encouraging them to really engage in a scholarly way and in a critical way with other texts, so that they can showcase what they actually know. Most of the times, we don't even know what the students know because they've never published anything and they've never written anything. They've never critiqued any other idea or in a way where everyone can kind of judge them. Not much that we can see, right? So obviously in the Persian world, you can see that in the Farsi and the Arabic world, there is a lot of that happening. But in the English world, there's not much out there, right? So this is something that I wanted to bring up. Now, I did say that there is this entire second, or let's say third dimension of this discussion, which is the standardized exams after the revolution of Islamic Revolution. All of that is a very different story, and a lot of reforms were made at that time. And the basic structure is perhaps still the same as Ayatullah Borujerdi put it, but regardless, a lot of things are changed now. It is still linked with your stipend, but there are still many other factors that come into play, and many other challenges that can also appear at that time. Anyways, I hope that this was interesting. As I said, there's so many other side discussions that can happen over here, and I know I took too long over here, but I just wanted to bring and share this piece of research because this does not exist. Unfortunately, even in English, I couldn't find anything written by an academic on this specific topic. Neither could I find anything specific independently published on this topic in Arabic or Farsi. So this is probably the only place you're going to find any historical research collectively brought and presented on this specific subject. So inshallah, I hope that this was beneficial. I hope it engages and provokes certain questions and discussions, and inshallah, we look forward to another episode. I look forward to seeing all of you in a future episode, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.